Hello, I'm here south of Pea Ridge in Arkansas on the Old Wire Road. In that direction, the Old Wire Road will cross Sugar Creek. At Sugar Creek Road, one of the detachments would go west into northern Indian Territory, which would be Osage country, Osage territory at that time. This is the Old Wire Road that is unpaved. I'm going to walk this up to Pea Ridge Military Battlefield and see the display and museum they have there on the Trail of Tears. 11 detachments made up the northern route that came down this Old Wire Road. They were underneath Chief John Ross's supervision. The water routes would consist. The water routes were difficult. When they hit low water, Joseph Harris, he would eventually die 6 months later from the results of the sickness that he had there on the Arkansas River when he was leading the detachment. That whole detachment underneath Harris would die on the water route. Nearly every one of them would because of sickness. The Whitley, the Drain, they would take, because of the low water on the water route, they would take the land route close to the same area that the Bell route would later follow into Indian Territory, where the natural dam is in Evansville. The John Binge route would come in through northeastern Arkansas. They would go in through Arkansas, in through Westville, and some of them maybe down to Evansville. John Binge was an interesting man. He almost got into a gunfight in one of the places they stopped. On the John Binge route, there were times where they would stop at places and some of the Cherokees would partake in gambling and drinking. And John Binge would always defend the Cherokees, and he was quick with the gun, and he did not like white settlers. He admitted that he hated every one of them. And I don't blame him in his day for what the Cherokee were going through and went through. So 11 of the detachments made up the northern routes of the Cherokee that would come through this part of Arkansas into Indian Territory. The northern route were the routes, the detachments, the 11 detachments on the northern route through the years, the late 1830s. They were the detachments that suffered the most during the Trail of Tears. Now, some of them on the water route, they suffered a great deal. I mean, I guess the Harris route, nearly every one of them died, perished. The water routes were, those detachments on the water routes, many of them, only one of the water routes were underneath John Ross's supervision. The rest of the water routes, those that were on the water route, took the water route, were forced by bayonet. And a lot of their, and they were poorly treated and poorly fed. They were forced by bayonet to get on the boats. Families separated, ripped apart. Parents were torn from their children, children torn from their parents. The 11 detachments that made up the northern route that came down this way, they suffered a great deal. There were some on some of the routes, some of the detachments, there were some wealthy Cherokee families that were somewhat in a more comfortable mode of transportation and so forth, and their welfare was a little better than the others because of their wealth that they had. Of course, that's based on eyewitness accounts. I want to find out what detachment took the Sugar Road west of here, and hopefully maybe this museum up here, the battlefield, will let us know. But most of the 11 detachments that took the northern route, you had Daniel Buttrick, who was a missionary. His church, the Brainerd Mission, made up most of one of the detachments. And of course you had Evan Jones in one detachment, you had Jesse Bushyhead in another detachment. Sometimes these would cross paths with each other. They would get together and have what was considered camp meeting style services. Now on the Trail of Tears, there were no cheerfulness, there was no joy, except for in these detachments that would stop to have Sabbath services. They would not travel on the Sabbath. They would have baptismal services, and they would have camp meeting style services. That was the only time that the appearance of happiness would be seen or could be found. There were thousands that were participated in these camp meeting style services. Nearly every one of these 11 detachments consisted of 1,000 Cherokee or more. Anywhere from, in one detachment, you would have anywhere from 300 to 600 horses and over 60 wagons. These were large wagons. So it's quite a sight to see. A lot of sadness and sickness. The women in many of the detachments were poorly clothed. Many of them only had a blanket to keep themselves warm. And a lot of them traveled barefoot. A lot of the elders traveled barefoot. There were babies being born during the detachment, during their route, this northern route. There were many babies that were dying. Many children died. Many elders died. A lot of the elders walked barefoot. There's many in the detachments that walked on foot, carried loads on their back, were poorly clothed, and were barefoot. And this is going during the winter season. They would sleep on frozen ground. They would sleep on the wet ground. They had poor shelter. Sometimes the ferries would try to take advantage of them, overcharging. So many of them would cross the rivers by foot. The rivers that they could by foot. There were wagon accidents, wagons rolling, tipping over. Some of the ferries, there would be ferry accidents. Here in this area, in one of these camps near Sugar Creek, there would be in one of the detachments, a small child would be killed. There would be a wagon accident where the wagon rolled over a little Cherokee boy, and he died and was buried around here somewhere. I do not know the location of his grave. I passed a lot of old cemeteries, but they were only from the early 1900s, some of these farmlands. So this is the old wire road. In some of the detachments, you had groups of Creeks that were traveling with the Cherokee, and which was interesting. So When I get up here a little further, I'll do another video on the Old Wire Road and the Trail of Tears.